Welcome to the Co-Authoring Chronicles podcast, 2 voices, 1 tale.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our podcast. I'm Helen Corvis, author and recent survivor of the flu season.
Hi, everyone. This is Steaphan, and I haven't had the flu, thankfully.
Good for you, man. That's all I have to say, because it was vicious this year. All right. Today's plot line, or today's topic, is writing main characters as parts of yourself, the author. And so what we're really talking about is how authors, in the varying degrees of which they can draw on parts of their selves, their personality, their experience, to create a character and enrichen their story.
Life experiences, right? And I often wonder because sometimes consider myself a boring person. What if you don't have any life experiences to include in your characters?
That's when you start really digging deep.
Yeah, I guess so. But
Yeah.
what's that saying?
Right. What you know?
No, we are multitudes or something like that.
Oh, right. We
I don't know
contain
who said that.
multitudes. It's from what is it? Song of Myself by oh, now I'm blanking on it. It's a very famous classic writer and poet. Oh well, we'll have to get back to it.
Yeah, well,
But as
put
you
it in the notes.
Yeah, very good. Excellent. So let's discuss why, as an author, you insert yourself or put parts of yourself in your story. Of course, it's hard to avoid, right? As authors, I think as humans, we're all inherently biased or portraying events as filtered through the lens of our own perception. But from an intentional perspective, it's really great to consider what's actually going on in this process of creating. So, for example, when you intentionally decide to, this sounds kind of funny, when you intentionally decide to involve yourself in your own story, one thing that usually can be a result is that you're really telling a much better story. You're telling something that will feel more authentic. It's something that can be very personal, and that always allows you to add an extra shade of description, detail, nuance, and sometimes even personal feeling that can really resonate with your reader, especially if there's been a reader who's gone through something similar. I know every time I read something, I occasionally feel like I can tell that the author really either talked to somebody who'd actually experienced this or has experienced it themselves.
Also, if you've done extraordinary things in your life, not boring things, like, for example, just silly example, like you climbed Mount Everest, and you may have some aspects of the harrowing tale you put in a story about.
Mhm. And if you're somebody as a reader who's never climbed Mount Everest, then this is gonna be very educational.
Exactly. And maybe you have a career, like you find several crime thriller authors that are ex law enforcement or attorneys or things like that, career-based life experiences, and it's a
Mhm.
natural area of expertise that people just write to that.
Yeah. That's a really good example. So, another reason that authors engage in this can sometimes be part of a method of creating distance for themselves when they are trying to explore or tell very specifically about very difficult personal experiences. And the example that comes to mind is actually Viktor Frankl and his book that was based on being a Holocaust survivor. He had traveled through 3 concentration camps, and he wrote a book about it that's pretty famous, Man's Search for Meaning. And even in the introduction, he acknowledges that he doesn't want to be the person writing the book because he feels that as the person who experienced the story, there's going to be some bias about it. And as a psychologist, he kind of wishes he was able to write it from more of a distance than he is. But as a survivor, he's the only one uniquely equipped to tell the story. And so that's an example of somebody who's using I guess the mechanism of authorship to at least put some distance between themselves and what must have been an intensely difficult and personal experience to write a book.
I guess this would line up with the healing aspect of being able to write about these difficult personal experiences, and kind of like a way, I guess, a fancy way or more in-depth way of talking to somebody, except you're talking to whoever picks up your novel.
Yes, yeah,
Um,
that's a good one.
and I think here, when we talk about, our work that we've co-authored together, uh, in the Arms of the Void, I would say that this point might be some of the things that I've portrayed when writing Viper. Um, Viper has some definitely dark patches in his life that affect his future decision making.
Mhm.
And so if I were to say, yeah, of all the things we're talking about today, and if I wouldn't say it's extensive, but I definitely think some maybe relationship areas in my life maybe have touched in
Mhm.
some of like Viper's personality as we portrayed it.
Yeah. And I think in another way, it also, as a co-author, it's probably allowed me to engage in the second type of reason why, or the third type of reason why authors do this is part of creative exploration, right? You can experiment with what if I had done something different? Or in response to kind of the scenario you've laid out, if you have a difficult personal situation, how, as the other character, as Glittrix, would I have preferred to react to this when it's presented? So really, it can be a nice mechanism, almost like your own time travel, right? What if I had done something different for this scenario?
Wow, that's that. Yeah, that I guess that could be healing too, right? Because sometimes we get lost in that life choices. And I don't know about you, but I often uh, retrospective moments in my where I sit there and go, "I would have done that, and what would my life turn out as?" And what if? Uh, yeah,
Yeah.
like be healing too.
Yeah, I agree, and to me, it's definitely a much happier way for me to proceed through the book. I think there's like this moment in the Arms of the Void where Viper does something that I would consider almost unforgivable to Glittrix, and instead of immediately like excusing it, she's like righteously upset about it, and that's like that's how I want things to be. There's room for that kind of response. So, anyway, the last reason I want to touch on about why authors might want to engage in this is that it's in a lot of ways it's a way to really explore and kind of understand one's own identity, right? And it's kind of I would say it draws on some of the other reasons we've talked about, right? You're creating an authentic story. The story is giving you some distance, perhaps, to examine situations, and they may be situations that you've maybe wish you reacted differently. And for a moment, you can kind of, if you've created, I think, a character, a unique character of their own, and maybe it's a kind of a simulacrum of yourself in some ways, but it really can help you understand, right, some motivations that maybe you yourself have not really thought about before. All right. So I think there's a pretty good case for choosing to intentionally introduce parts of yourself and your experience into your story, into your main character. And let's talk about kind of the how or the different degrees to which this can occur. Because whether you do it intentionally or not, I think every creative work says something about the artist. And so here, when we talk about more of the intentional representations of self. It really is on a spectrum. At one end, we have, some characters who are kind of a representative or a surrogate of the author. They have similar beliefs and perspectives as the author does themselves. And then all the way on the other end of the extreme, it's a full autobiography. The story is actually extremely and specifically based or very closely mirroring the author's life. And while there might have been a few surface level, changes for whatever reason, right, to not identify people who may not want to be specifically identified, but the story is almost a retelling of the author's life. And there's a range in there.
Yeah, I was just thinking about as you were going through that. I'll kick it off. The first level that you mentioned, the author surrogate or characters express some of their beliefs. I was trying to think, could I write a main character that, good or bad, doesn't contain any of my perspectives? I don't think I have, but I'm sitting here wondering, could I? What do you
Mhm.
think?
Well, the funny thing is, I actually think it's like a big, not recommendation, right? Like it's an
Mhm.
anti-pattern for authorship. People who write about things of which they have not done any research or any experience tend not to have works that are received well in communities that do understand something about the work. So I guess the risk is when you write something like that, you may actually be portraying like some very obvious stereotypes or doing a disservice to any communities that you happen to represent in your work. I'm not saying it hasn't been done. I'm fairly sure hundreds and hundreds of people have written things about which they know nothing.
Yeah, yeah.
But, inherently, I think you could just tell or not from my tone of voice what I think about that.
No, I think you nailed it. You nailed it.
Yeah.
You have to be, like, I would say, a very professional, very seasoned author to pull off writing main characters that are antithetical to you.
Well, I mean, and in some ways, right, it's kind of funny because when we think about villains before, you could almost just say, well, the villain is somebody who's the exact opposite of the main character. But the truth is, like, the key to even having really impactful villains, right, the ones we seem to enjoy the most these days are the ones that we sympathize with just a little bit, right? The villain who's lost a family member, and that's what set them on the path to of crime and evil, or the villain who's doing this because, he needs to feed his family, or he's out for vengeance because
Right.
of some personal tragedy. Right? I think it's really hard to write these things without some kind of personal basis and have a villain that you unless it's like the boogeyman, right?
Right.
Like, that's what makes monsters, is
Mhm.
sometimes it's people that or things or creatures that we don't understand the motivation for. So, I guess there is room for that.
Yeah, I meant to probably not say main character, but protagonist. Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah.
what do you do?
So when we kind of like traverse this spectrum, like we can start by having a character has similar beliefs or similar experiences, and then we get really more into self-insertion, where it's a more obvious representation of the author within the story. And this is for me where I sometimes, depending on the author, I sometimes get a little concerned about the story because it's also where we start walking the line of what I keep referring to as the problem of Mary Sue and Gary Stew, which is what the internet loves to refer to when you read a story where it's extremely obvious that the main character is almost like a magical fantasy projection of the author themselves.
Yeah. What was that? Was it that movie by Clive, or the novel that was made into a movie?
Sahara, wasn't it?
Mm,
Sahara by is it Clive Cussler?
no, maybe well, I think we're talking about two different ones.
Oh, probably.
And I may have got the name wrong, but it was basically a horror novel where the author was themselves inside the story. He's a writer in the story, writing his own story, and it goes horribly wrong.
Oh gosh. Okay,
Uh,
I think I
I'm
missed
gonna
that
have to
one.
add it to the notes. I can't remember the name. I'm sure everyone listening like knows exactly
Yeah,
what
yeah, they're like, "Helen, Stefan, duh."
Mm. We
Sorry,
need to get a
everyone.
chat and have live
Live
podcasts or
feedback. What are
something.
we talking about? But
Yeah.
that's probably I think probably more entertaining and a better like obvious representation, right, of the author um within the story. I think where I see a lot of times the problems are is where you have a main character who's just like brilliant at everything, right? They know all the forms of martial arts, or they pick up magic like really easily and everyone loves them, and the only problems they have are a series of uncontrollable events that they have to surmount. But the thing is, like, the difference between what I'm describing and I think a character that is more believable is that you have to know that your character has actual issues, right? I think when things are too good to be true is when it becomes a problem. They're beautiful, they've got, everything going for them, and they solve their problems with ease, and there's nothing wrong with them. And it's that part where there's nothing wrong with them where we start having, I think, some inability to invest, or maybe find the main character to become unbearable. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the real problem with a Mary Sue or Gary Stu is that as an author, when you lose perspective of any kind of difficulties or genuine challenging emotion that the main character may feel because you're involved in a fantasy, that's really where the problems start to arise.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what stage is that, the last phase?
No, actually, it's somewhere in the middle. It's like the self-insertion where you can tell it's
Mhm.
the author, but
Okay.
not in a good way.
Okay. All right. Well,
Yeah,
um,
because when you go into semi like autobiographical, right, which is like almost all the way to total biography, where the narrator and the plot line are both based on the author, I sometimes feel in that way to tell a believable story, unless you're skipping all the bad parts of your life, you know, you're not even really achieving anything that's autobiographical. But that's just
mhm.
my thought. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that I would never want to write semi autobiographical. Well, if I could say it, semi autobiographical story.
Mhm.
I don't think I'd want to write it. And again, it's probably just mostly because um, I don't think I've done a whole lot of super exciting things
Mhm.
that my genre of fiction would lend to.
Yeah. I think this is where you run into stories where it's like, "Oh, I'm a great ladies' man, and let me write to you all about my multiple conquests." These kinds of stories, while they may be popular with a very specific type of audience member, I think can also just come across as just really being too ego based, I think sometimes for the
Hmm.
rest of us. So yeah, I mean, there you have it, right? It's you as the author have choose your own adventure. You can intentionally choose to involve as much or as little of yourself in your main characters, but I think there's definitely room for, authenticity, a revelation of personal experience. That is sometimes the adventure I think that our readers are looking for.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, by the way, it did come to my mind, the movie. I think it was just a movie, John Carpenter in the Mouth of Madness.
Oh, I
It
don't know
wasn't
that one.
fully writing about the writer themselves, but it is about an author that writes stories that come to life. So,
Mhm.
anyways, I just wanted to put that out there.
Mm.
Okay, so then what is our last degree of self-representation?
Yes, the full autobiography.
Mhm. You can say it. You pulled it off.
I tried real hard.
Yeah. What is this about?
It's really the author telling the story of their life. The funny thing is I actually don't read a lot of autobiographies.
Mhm.
I don't know, do you?
No, not at all.
Mm.
I guess we can't talk about it.
Oh, no!
Yep.
I'm joking. Well, I'm looking at my shelf right now, and to be honest, the only full I don't think I've You might be right. I don't know if we can talk about this. Everything on my shelf that's like as close to a full biography as possible is almost a reference manual, because that's kind of what I tend to go for. The closest stories I think I've read that have been really grounded in explicit experience on my shelf. Let me see. Not Agatha Christie. I don't think she ever actually murdered anyone.
Yeah.
And
Okay, maybe that's why she was so good. She was writing what she knows. Yeah.
apparently what she knows is people. Um,
Mm. Well, the interweb says uh, adaptation from 2002. The screenwriter Charlie Kaufman wrote himself into the screenplay. Would that count or no?
well, they made a movie out of it too.
Yeah.
I hate to say, I think it's Will Ferrell. Did Will Ferrell do kind of a semi-serious job in that, an adaptation? So I actually didn't watch it, but
No, no.
I don't know. What this also brings to mind in an odd way that it's do you remember Being John Malkovich?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where in an odd way, somebody else writes about being John Malkovich, then John Malkovich starred in it. I loved it. It's not quite, it's almost like a reverse insertion, right? Where you
Yeah.
insert somebody else.
I know. It's
But
interesting.
anyway, so I think maybe a few examples to kind of wrap this up. I mean, is there any example where you feel, in our writing that we've been able to rely on how we felt? Like I think I will kick off.
Okay.
But for example, something that I like to think about is every once in a while. A while ago, I had a medical incident, and it impacted my heart. And what was interesting is that I don't know sometimes if anybody really ever understands what it's like when you go through certain physical scenarios and what that pain or the sensation can feel like. And so sometimes when I write, especially in the first book, with In the Arms of the Void, where there have been like some physical injuries, to me, it's actually kind of a nice moment to go through that experience again in a way we've described, right? It provides some distance, but in a way I can kind of go through that moment again and to consciously process like that injury and try to write it out almost as an exercise.
Hmm. Well, and did it work? I mean, did you feel like
I feel, you know what? It's wild. I feel like even though it wasn't something that I had direct control over, in a way, I feel like at least I've been able to utilize it for something purposeful, right? Like I didn't just go through that for nothing. I was at least able to write it into a scene, which sounds kind of small, but it does actually make me feel a little bit better about it.
that's good then? Yeah, and I guess I already alluded to mine with Viper, but really I'd say specifically Viper coping with bad decisions that he later learned were maybe not the best, that affected other people.
Hmm.
And, I guess that's probably fairly common in life. But I guess I've had some in my younger days, some really bad decision making that has haunted me. And so I guess say that some of that writing about Viper um,
Hmm.
kind of lets that run free in the writing a little bit.
Yeah.
So
And the nice thing about being co-authors, as I said before, is it does give me a chance to perhaps write out how I wish I would have reacted sometimes
yeah,
in response. So it's a nice combination of all of those. And I think but to me, I try to keep very conscious of when I write a response is would this character actually go for it? Like our Sumerians are touch adverse, but yet we wrote a physical romance is scene
hmm
in there. And so it's also an interesting way for me to explore these kind of moments where it's like, if you, again, on the physical sensation, if you've ever had a moment where you've not wanted to be touched, but then you think about the times where you might grow through a relationship and actually decide to engage in intimacy. Like, these are all very personal topics. So it's
Mhm,
really been I've really enjoyed writing though.
mhm,
So yeah.
mhm. And I hope like 100 years from now, there will be some literature studies done on us because we're such famous authors, where people analyze our lives and the novels that we've written and say, well, this is what the author Helen Corvis wrote.
Now I'm worried, right? Because it's like a lot of people have liked to do that analysis of Jane Austen's life because she wrote
Mhm.
those kind of, for some people, classic social, romances of her time period. But she herself was never married. And then when they look back on it, they feel that perhaps she was disappointed in love. And I'm always like, no,
Yeah.
I know that there's more to life than romance. There is.
What?
But it always,
Oh.
yes, there is. But it always seems to feel a little sad, right? To think that she wrote about all these happy endings for her characters, and you're unsure if she had a happy ending as well.
Oh, wow. I am moved at that, just
Yeah.
thinking about that. But, well, is there any other things we wanted to touch on before we wrap this episode? Yeah.
Yes. So
Mm.
anybody out there who winds up reading our work,
Mm.
I did not insert myself. Those characters are not me.
All right.
I mean,
Duly noted
the good
for
parts.
historical purposes.
Yes, maybe the
Okay.
good parts.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for listening today, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye.